This game will teach you the correct approach as to how to use a space advantage in chess. How not to overextend, but how to use it with momentum, how to propel your attack forward and leave the enemy king in shambles. It was played by Alexander Alekhine in 1928 in London. His opponent is Alan Linnell Fletcher, and there's much to learn, much to discuss from this game. It starts with a symmetrical English. Alekhine strikes with d4, and we get an old variation knight to c6. Why is knight to c6 an old variation? Well, it allows you to gain a tempo on the knight. Don't think black didn't see that though. There was a purpose behind his madness. Why did black go knight c6 just to go back to b8? Well, you see, in the symmetrical English, typically the light squared bishop for white does not enter on this diagonal, nor black's dark squared diagonal. Both bishops typically get fianchettoed, and you see from this pawn extension, black will have the better fianchettoed bishop than white. So black lost a tempo to have a better fianchettoed bishop. It's quite high level thinking. We get knight c3, pawn d6. Okay, white is beginning to have the space advantage, and both sides fianchetto. This is a video about space advantage, so I'm not delving into the intricacies of the opening too much, just explaining them a little bit. We get castles, bishop to f4, fine. Developing the dark squared bishop. Pawn h6. All right, this is not how black should be playing. See, black already lost a tempo with this knight, so what he should be doing is really going knight a6, knight c7, and trying to attack the base of white's pawn structure. Right, this c4, d5 pawn chain, black needs to challenge the integrity of it on the queen side. See, black's pawn chain is facing the queen side. His counterplay comes from the queen side. Vice versa, white's pawn chain is facing the king side. He's going to attack on the king side. But when you give up a tempo, you can't just give up another tempo like h6. It's a soft fianchetto, and it allows white to complete development with a threat. Do you see how? Queen to d2. You set up a battery on h6, two attackers, one defender. Black is going to need to respond to that. And it's almost like he loses another tempo moving his king to h7. And white now gets e4 in. Full space advantage, ahead in development. But it's very easy to ruin things like this, right? It's like not like you're crushing. It's just you're obviously better. But humans ruin good things. This guy did not. That's why it's such an instructive game. We got knight to h5. All right. Do you want this knight to take the bishop? Well, are knights on the side of the board good? They're not too good typically. So you don't want the knight to take the bishop. I would say this bishop has a larger relative value than this knight. So save the bishop, move it back. And you see in the last move, black's knight got worse. White's bishop maintained its strength. So I'd say white gained a little bit of an edge in the last two moves. Okay, this bishop did get better, but it's not like he's threatening to damage our structure or anything. And this knight is going to need to figure itself out. It's got some soul searching to do. We get knight bd7. All right, black is developing, and rook e1. You might be like, that is a weird way to coordinate the rooks. I would argue any other way would be more strange. Right, because think of it. Which two pawns are you planning to push? You're planning to push the f pawn and the e pawn because your attack is on the king side. See, maybe aesthetically, you might think rook on the c file, rook on the d file, but those two pawns are blockaded, right? You want rooks behind pawns that have a plan, rooks behind pawns that are dynamic, not static in nature. These are static pawns because they're blockaded. These are dynamic pawns because they have a plan, or they could have a future plan. So that's the argument for moving the rook a to e1. Even though this rook is trapped, there's no way it could be punished on this diagonal or anything of the sort. We got rook to b8. All right, a little too late by black, but he's trying. He's like, okay, I see there's a base of your pawn chain. I'm going to try for some queenside expansion. Knight h4. You might be like, I thought you said knights on the side of the board are not great. I said usually. Sometimes they're the greatest. What is the point of this knight on h4? It's not like it's a fantastic knight, but remember, we want to push the f pawn. So he moved the knight out of the way to push the f pawn. And this knight is chilling, right? Black's not going to go g5. Black goes g5. This knight comes to f5. It's a menace. It's a great knight over here on f5. So this knight can't be kicked out so easily. We get knight df6, all right? It opens up the bishop. And also, what else should you think of? Well, I think you should be like, okay, black's the one that's cramped, so he's looking for trades. When you have a space advantage, you want to avoid trades because in an endgame, then it's going to be an overextension. Less pieces on the board, the less good a space advantage is. So principally, I'd be thinking black wants to move his knight to g4 to trade off the bishop. And you see, with this knight on f6, this knight on h5 is trapped. It's even worse. So you don't want black's plan to happen. So how do you stop knight g4? You could go f3 or h3, but didn't we already have a plan with the f pawn to go to f4? Yes, so use the h pawn, go to h3. This stops the knight from coming to g4. Also, it threatens pawn g4 yourself. See, when black went h6 in the beginning of the game, it was weakening. But white is already fully developed and coordinated, so h3 is not a weakness that can be made to look like a weakness. And if it can't be made to look like a weakness, it's not actually a weakness. And in one move, you're threatening to go g4 to trap this knight on h5. You see that? Remember how g5 would be bad for black, but g4 is good for white. See, it's a different position for each respective side. So knight fg8 or knight g8 because he wants to retreat the other knight to f6. We get pawn to g4, kicking the knight back, and pawn to f4. All right, look at this. This is where the master class comes in. Look at this pawn structure. If you're too quick with it, you ruined a good thing. Don't do that. Try not to do that. It happens sometimes, but you try to avoid it. Pawn to e6, all right, trying to break up the pawn structure, and beautiful, just knight f3. You know, maybe he was like, oh, I see your tactics, right? If the knight moves, always be weary of this discovery on the knights on the flanks. So he goes knight to f3. He's like, I didn't want my knight on h4. I just put it there to move my f-pawn, but I already moved my f-pawn, so I'm just moving it back. Takes. How do we take back? By process of elimination, you should not even consider knight takes. I mean, you can consider it, but reject it, right? It's good to dance around ideas, but it's good to reject ideas too. And it's good to accept others. But reject knight takes d5 because what's the principle that tells us? You don't want to trade when you have a space advantage. You see, they take and then they move their other knight out. No. Keep that knight on g8. It's not a good guy. It's just passive out of the game. Leave it there. Leave it be. So you're going to take back with a pawn. Hopefully you don't think you should take back with the queen. Which pawn do you take back with? Well, a good principle is capture towards the side of the board you're attacking on. That would be take with the c pawn, right? Because we're attacking on the king side. So good rule of thumb is to capture towards the side you're attacking on. You see, if you take with the e pawn, you've just made static the center, and that's not what you wanted. You split your pawn structure, right? So now you have two pawn islands. You made the center static, and you kind of wanted to rip it open because you have the attack going. You have the momentum. This is going to be a very good break because when you get e5 in later on, that attacks the base of the pawn chain, which indirectly will then target c5. So very good. He takes with the c pawn. b5. Finally, some queenside expansion by black. And we get pawn to e5. No hesitation. What should black do? Well, he goes b4, the best move. Very good. Now, you got to pause. Okay, we could take, but they take. So that doesn't look too good, right? Because we're threatening a bishop, but they're threatening a queen. So we're going to need to take this queen back, or I'm sorry, we're going to need to take this guy back, and then they're going to take this pawn back. And you see they got trades. They kind of damaged their pawn structure a little bit, and their pieces are going to be getting into the game. And just like that, black could be slightly better. That's how fast a space advantage can go south. So you move the knight. He moves it to d1, and black's knight comes forward. It looks like black is getting some momentum, but again, this knight's just not doing anything. You might be like, okay, knight g3, but that's just a one-move threat, right? Knight g3, you just go rook f2, and the knight is trapped over there on g3. So he goes f5. Now what do you do? You could go en passant, but understandably, Aliekin didn't want the knights to get into the game together. So I really like the move he chose. Also, keynote. Another way to ruin this is just to take. See, one simple pawn exchange can give away your whole advantage. It helps black develop. Now they have the tactics in the position. Their pieces are out. And again, you lost one pawn, but your whole attack is gone. That's why it's very easy to go wrong with the space advantage. But he goes pawn e6. I like this move personally. Cuts the bishop off from the king side. Very nice. Good stuff. Now what black should have done is gone rook b6 to go bishop a6. Instead, he went queen to a5, and you just can't do that. You know, we have a lot of pieces on the king side. You need your best piece over here, guarding at a moment's notice any holes that are left on the king side. Bringing it over to the queen side is just too slow. White snaps off because now the bishop can't recapture. Black has to take back with the pawn, and you see this king is getting a little weak now. Now the threat is obviously bishop a6, but try to find, if you create a bigger threat than the threat your opponent's creating, you don't need to respond to their idea. They need to respond to yours. So try to find it. Knight h4 is very beautiful. Right, and luckily we do get bishop a6. Why is white winning? Brilliant sequence here. Queen takes knight. That is not a blunder. It's a sacrifice. It's not a blunder. It's a brilliancy. Black does take, luckily, and enter mate in 6. Pause the video, find the mate in 6. You got it. I trust you. I have faith. Push yourself. Push your calculation. That's the only way you'll improve. But it's bishop takes check, king to h8, knight to g6. I'm sure you guys all saw that. And then maybe you reach this position. Logically, you take the rook, right? Removing a rook. And this is a windmill tactic. Now find the mate in 2. Of course you can do a perpetual, but why perpetual when you have a mate? The way I would think about it is, okay, you need the bishop to ch7. When you move the knight, the king is going to be on h8. Where else can the knight be to deliver check to the king that's on h8? f7, right? Because then the bishop sees h7. The knight will be checkmating the king on h8. So find the route to f7. You might be like, knight h8. No, then he takes it. Don't do that. Knight e5 check. The king moves. Knight f7 is checkmate. Aliekin wins the game in stylistic fashion. I think that's what I meant to say. Mate in 6. Queen sacrifice. Space advantage. Approved. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I think it was a very instructive game. Thank you as always for watching. See you this week. Peace. Boom.